Chapter 48. Just like St. Augustine. Bokanon, I learned from Castle's book, was born in 1891. He was a Negro, born an Episcopalian and a British subject on the island of Tobago. He was christened Lionel Boyd Johnson. He was the youngest of 6 children, born to a wealthy family. His family's wealth derived from the discovery by Bokanon's grandfather of $250,000 buried pirate treasure, presumably a treasure of Blackbeard, of Edward Teach. Blackbeard's treasure was reinvested by Bokanon's family in asphalt, copra, cacao, livestock, and poultry. Young Lionel Boyd Johnson was educated in Episcopal schools, did well as a student, and was more interested in ritual than most. As a youth, for all his interest in the outward trappings of organized religions, he seemed to have been a carouser, for he invites us to sing along with him in his 14th Calypso. When I was young, I was so gay and mean, and I drank and chased the girls, just like young St. Augustine. St. Augustine, he gotta be a saint. So if I get to be one also, please, Mama, don't you faint. Chapter 49. A fish pitched up by an angry sea. Lionel Boyd Johnson was intellectually ambitious enough, in 1911, to sail alone from Tobago to London in a sloop named the Lady Slipper. His purpose was to gain a higher education. He enrolled in the London School of Economics and Political Science. His education was interrupted by the First World War. He enlisted in the infantry, fought with distinction, was commissioned in the field, was mentioned 4 times in dispatches. He was gassed in the Second Battle of Ypres, was hospitalized for 2 years, and then discharged. He set sail for home, for Tobago, alone in the Lady Slipper again. When only 80 miles from home, he was stopped and searched by a German submarine, the U-99. He was taken prisoner, and his little vessel was used by the Huns for target practice. While still surfaced, the submarine was surprised and captured by the British destroyer, the Raven. Johnson and the Germans were taken on board the destroyer, and the U-99 was sunk. The Raven was bound for the Mediterranean, but it never got there. It lost its steering. It could only wallow helplessly or make grand clockwise circles. It came to rest at last in the Cape Verde Islands. Johnson stayed in those islands for 8 months, awaiting some sort of transportation to the Western Hemisphere. He got a job at last as a crewman on a fishing vessel that was carrying illegal immigrants to New Bedford, Massachusetts. The vessel was blown ashore at Newport, Rhode Island. By that time, Johnson had developed a conviction that something was trying to get him somewhere, for some reason. So he stayed in Newport for a while to see if he had a destiny there. He worked as a gardener and carpenter on the famous Rumford estate. During that time, he glimpsed many distinguished guests of the Rumfords, among them J.P. Morgan, General John J. Pershing, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Enrico Caruso, Warren Gamaliel Harding, and Harry Houdini. And it was during that time that the First World War came to an end, having killed 10 million persons and wounded 20 million, Johnson among them. When the war ended, the young rake hell of the Rumford family, Remington Rumford IV, proposed to sail his steam yacht, the Scheherazade, around the world, visiting Spain, France, Italy, Greece, Egypt, India, China, and Japan. He invited Johnson to accompany him as first mate, and Johnson agreed. Johnson saw many wonders of the world on the voyage. The Scheherazade was rammed in a fog in Bombay harbor and only Johnson survived. He stayed in India for 2 years, becoming a follower of Mohandas K. Gandhi. He was arrested for leading groups that protested British rule by lying down on railroad tracks. When his jail term was over, he was shipped at Crown expense to his home in Tobago. There he built another schooner, which he called the Lady Slipper, too. And he sailed her about the Caribbean, an idler, still seeking the storm that would drive him ashore on what was unmistakably his destiny. In 1922, he sought shelter from a hurricane in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, which country was then occupied by United States Marines. Johnson was approached there by a brilliant, self-educated, idealistic Marine deserter named Earl McCabe. McCabe was a corporal. He had just stolen his company's recreation fund. He offered Johnson $500 for transportation to Miami. The two set sail for Miami. But a gale hounded the schooner onto the rocks of San Lorenzo. The boat went down. Johnson and McCabe, absolutely naked, managed to swim ashore. As Bokanon himself reports the adventure, a fish pitched up by the angry sea. I gasped on land, and I became me. He was enchanted by the mystery of coming ashore naked on an unfamiliar island. He resolved to let the adventure run its full course, resolved to see just how far a man might go, emerging naked from salt water. It was a rebirth for him. Be like a baby, the Bible say. So I stay like a baby to this very day. How he came by the name of Bokanon was very simple. Bokanon was the pronunciation given, the name Johnson, in the island's English dialect. As for that dialect, the dialect of San Lorenzo is both easy to understand and difficult to write down. I say it is easy to understand, but I speak only for myself. Others have found it as incomprehensible as Basque, so my understanding of it may be telepathic. Philip Castle in his book gave a phonetic demonstration of the dialect and caught its flavor very well. He chose for his example the San Lorenzo version of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. In American English, one version of that immortal poem goes like this. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, shining in the sky so bright, like a tea tray in the night. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Which I just want to say, as a note from me, myself, I've never heard that version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but, whatever. Anyway, back to the story. In San Lorenzo dialect, according to Castle, the same poem went like this. Svenskjul, svenskjul, let pustor, godi svantur bat vujor, punchnik on list Josef brav, kamun dinchon on leonaf, svenko, svenko, let pustor, godi sventur bat vujor. Shortly after Johnson became Bokanon, incidentally, the lifeboat of his shattered ship was found on shore. The boat was later painted gold and made the bed of the island's chief executive. There is a legend made up by Bokanon, Philip Castle wrote in his book, that the golden boat will sail again when the end of the world is near. Chapter 50. A Nice Midget. My reading of the life of Bokanon was interrupted by H. Lowe Crosby's wife, Hazel. She was standing in the aisle next to me. You'll never believe it, she said, but I just found 2 more Hoosiers on this airplane. I'll be damned. They weren't born Hoosiers, but they live there now. They live in Indianapolis. Very interesting. You want to meet them? You think I should? The question baffled her. They're your fellow Hoosiers. What are their names? Her name is Connors, and his name is Honecker. They're brother and sister. And he's a midget. He's a nice midget, though. She winked. He's a smart little thing. Does he call you Mom? I almost asked him to, and then I stopped. And I wondered if maybe it wouldn't be rude to ask a midget to do that. Nonsense. Chapter 51. Okay, Mom. So I went aft to talk to Angela Honecker Connors and little Newton Honecker, members of my chorus. Angela was the horse-faced platinum blonde I had noticed earlier. Newt was a very tiny young man indeed, though not grotesque. He was as nicely scaled as Gulliver among the Brobdingnagians, and as shrewdly watchful, too. He held a glass of champagne, which was included in the price of his ticket. That glass was to him what a fishbowl would have been to a normal man, but he drank from it with elegant ease, as though he and the glass could not have been better matched. The little son of a bitch had a crystal of ice 9 in a thermos bottle in his luggage, and so did his miserable sister, while under us was God's own amount of water, the Caribbean Sea. When Hazel had got all the pleasure she could from introducing Hoosiers to Hoosiers, she left us alone. "Remember," she said as she left us, "from now on, call me Mom." "Okay, Mom," I said. "Okay, Mom," said Newt. His voice was fairly high, in keeping with his little larynx, but he managed to make that voice distinctly masculine. Angela persisted in treating Newt like an infant, and he forgave her for it with an amiable grace I would have thought impossible for one so small. Newt and Angela remembered the letters I'd written, and invited me to take the empty seat in their group of 3. Angela apologized to me for never having answered my letters. I couldn't think of anything to say that would interest anybody reading a book. I could have made up something about that day, but I didn't think you'd want that. Actually, the day was just like a regular day. Your brother here wrote me a very good letter. Angela was surprised. Newt did? How could Newt remember anything? She turned to him. Honey, you don't remember anything from that day, do you? You were just a baby. I remember, he said mildly. I wish I'd seen the letter. She implied that Newt was still too immature to deal directly with the outside world. Angela was a god-awfully insensitive woman, with no feeling for what smallness meant to Newt. Honey, you should have showed me that letter, she scolded. Sorry, said Newt. I didn't think. I might as well tell you, Angela said to me. Dr. Bree told me I wasn't supposed to cooperate with you. He said you weren't interested in giving a fair picture of Father. She showed me that she didn't like me for that. I placated her some by telling her that the book would probably never be done anyway, that I no longer had a clear idea of what it would or should mean. Well, if you ever do the book, you better make Father a saint, because that's what he was. I promised that I would do my best to paint that picture. I asked if she and Newt were bound for a family reunion with Frank in San Lorenzo. Frank's getting married, said Angela. We're going to the engagement party. Oh? Who's the lucky girl? I'll show you, said Angela. And she took from her purse a billfold that contained a sort of plastic accordion. And each of the accordion's pleats was a photograph. Angela flipped through the photographs, giving me her glimpses of little Newt on a Cape Cod beach, of Dr. Felix Honecker accepting his Nobel Prize, Angela's own homely twin girls, of Frank flying a model plane on the end of the string. And then she showed me a picture of the girl Frank was going to marry. She might, with equal effect, have struck me in the groin. The picture she showed me was of Mona Ammons Monzano, the woman I loved. Chapter 52. No pain. Once Angela had opened her plastic accordion, she was reluctant to close it until someone had looked at every photograph. "There are the people I love," she declared. So I looked at the people she loved, what she had trapped in plexiglass, what she had trapped like fossil beetles in amber, were the images of a large part of our cuirass. There wasn't a Granfalloner in the collection. There were many photographs of Dr. Honecker, father of a bomb, father of 3 children, father of Ice 9. He was a little person, the purported sire of a midget and a giantess. My favorite picture of the old man in Angela's fossil collection showed him all bundled up for winter, in an overcoat, scarf, galoshes, and a wool knit cap with a big pom-pom on the crown. This picture, Angela told me, with a catch in her throat, had been taken in Hyannis just about 3 hours before the old man died. A newspaper photographer had recognized the seeming Christmas elf for the great man he was. "Did your father die in the hospital?" "Oh, no. He died in our cottage in a big white wicker chair facing the sea. Newt and Frank had gone walking down the beach in the snow." "It was a very warm snow," said Newt. "It was almost like walking through orange blossoms. It was very strange. Nobody was in any of the other cottages." "Ours was the only one with heat," said Angela. "Nobody within miles," recalled Newt, wonderingly. "And Frank and I came across this big black dog out on the beach, a Labrador retriever. We threw sticks into the ocean and he brought them back." "I'd gone back into the village for more Christmas tree bulbs," said Angela. "We always had a tree." "Did your father enjoy having a Christmas tree?" "He never said," said Newt. "I think he liked it," said Angela. "He just wasn't very demonstrative. Some people aren't." "And some people are," said Newt. He gave a small shrug. "Anyway," said Angela, "when we got back home, we found him in the chair." She shook her head. "I don't think he suffered any. He just looked asleep. He couldn't have looked like that if there'd been the least bit of pain." She left out an interesting part of the story. She left out the fact that it was on that same Christmas Eve that she and Frank and little Newt had divided up the old man's Ice 9. Chapter 53. The President of Fabritech. Angela encouraged me to go on looking at snapshots. "That's me, if you could believe it." She showed me an adolescent girl, 6 feet tall. She was holding a clarinet in the picture, wearing the marching uniform of Ilium High School Band. Her hair was tucked up under a bandsman's hat. She was smiling with shy, good cheer. And then Angela, a woman to whom God had given virtually nothing with which to catch a man, showed me a picture of her husband. "So that's Harrison C. Connors." I was stunned. Her husband was a strikingly handsome man, and looked as though he knew it. He was a snappy dresser, and had the lazy rapture of a Don Juan about the eyes. What does he do?" I asked. "He's president of Fabritech." "Electronics?" I couldn't tell you, even if I knew. It's all very secret government work. Weapons? Well, war, anyway. How did you happen to meet? He used to work as a laboratory assistant to Father, said Angela. Then he went out to Indianapolis and started Fabritech. So your marriage to him was a happy ending to a long romance? No, I didn't even know he knew I was alive. I used to think he was nice, but he never paid any attention to me until after Father died. One day he came through Ilium. I was sitting around that big old house thinking my life was over. She spoke of the awful days and weeks that followed her father's death. Just me and little Newt in that big old house. Frank had disappeared, and the ghosts were making 10 times as much noise as Newt and I were. I'd given my whole life to taking care of Father, driving him to and from work, bundling him up when it was cold, unbundling him when it was hot, making him eat, paying his bills. Suddenly there wasn't anything for me to do. I'd never had any close friends, didn't have a soul to turn to but Newt. And then, she continued, there was a knock on the door, and there stood Harrison Connors. He was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. He came in, and we talked about Father's last days and about old times in general. Angela almost cried now. 2 weeks later, we were married. Chapter 54. Communists, Nazis, Royalists, parachutists, and draft dodgers. Returning to my own seat in the plane, feeling far shabbier for having lost Mona Ammons Monzano to Frank, I resumed my reading of Philip Castle's manuscript. I looked up Monzano, Mona Ammons in the index, and was told by the index to see Ammons, Mona. So I saw Ammons, Mona, and found almost as many page references as I'd found under the name of Papa Monzano himself. After Ammons, Mona came Ammons Nestor. So I turned to the few pages that had to do with Nestor and learned he was Mona's father, a native Finn, an architect. Nestor Ammons was captured by the Russians, then liberated by the Germans during the Second World War. He was not returned home by his liberators, but was forced to serve in Wehrmacht engineer unit that was sent to fight the Yugoslav partisans. He was captured by the Chetniks, royalist Serbian partisans, and then by communist partisans who attacked the Chetniks. He was liberated by Italian parachutists who surprised the communists, and he was shipped to Italy. The Italians put him to work designing fortifications for Sicily. He stole a fishing boat in Sicily and reached neutral Portugal. While there, he met an American draft dodger named Julian Castle. Castle, upon learning that Ammons was an architect, invited him to come with him to the island of San Lorenzo and to design for him a hospital to be called the House of Hope and Mercy in the Jungle. Ammons accepted. He designed the hospital, married a native woman named Celia, fathered a perfect daughter, and died. Chapter 55. Never index your own book. As for the life of Ammons, Mona, the index itself gave a jangling, surrealistic picture of the many conflicting forces that had been brought to bear on her and of her dismayed reactions to them. Ammons, Mona, the index said, adopted by Monzano in order to boost Monzano's popularity. 194 to 199, 216N. Childhood in Compound of House of Hope and Mercy, 63 to 81. Childhood Romance with P. Castle, 72. F. Death of Father, 89. FF. Death of Mother, 92F. Embarrassed by role as National Erotic Symbol 80, 95F, 166N, 209, 247N, 400 to 406, 566N, 678. Engaged to P. Castle 193. Essential Naivete 67 to 71, 80, 95 F, 116 N, 209, 274 N, 400 to 406, 566 N, 678. Lives with Bokanon 92 to 98, 196 to 197. Poems about 2 N, 26, 114, 119, 311, 316, 477 N, 501, 507, 555 N, 689, 718 FF, 799 FF, 800 N, 841, 846 FF, 908 N, 971, 974. Poems by 89, 92, 193. Returns to Monzano 199. Returns to Bokanon 197. Runs away from Bokanon 199. Runs away from Monzano 197. Tries to make self ugly in order to stop being erotic symbol to islanders 80, 95 F, 116 N, 209, 247 N, 400 to 406, 566 N, 678. Tutored by Bokanon 63 to 80. Writes letter to United Nations 200. Xylophone virtuoso 71. I showed this index to the Mittens, asking them if they didn't think it was an enchanting biography in itself, a biography of a reluctant goddess of love. I got an unexpectedly expert answer, as one does in life sometimes. It appears that Claire Mitten, in her time, had been a professional indexer. I had never heard of such profession before. She told me that she had put her husband through college years before with her earnings as an indexer, and that the earnings had been good, that few people could index well. She said that indexing was a thing that only the most amateurish author undertook to do for his own book. I asked her what she thought of Philip Castle's job. Flattering to the author, insulting to the reader, she said. In a hyphenated word, she observed, with the shrew amiability of an expert, self-indulgent. I'm always embarrassed when I see an index an author has made of his own work. Embarrassed? It's a revealing thing, an author's index of his own work, she informed me. It's a shameless exhibition to the trained eye. She can read character from an index, said her husband. Oh? I said. What can you tell me about Philip Castle? She smiled faintly. Things I had better not tell strangers. Sorry. He's obviously in love with this Mona Amons Monzano, she said. That's true of every man in San Lorenzo, I gather. He has mixed feelings about her father, she said. That's true of every man on earth, I egged her on gently. He's insecure. What mortal isn't? I demanded. I didn't know it then, but that was a very Bokanonist thing to demand. He'll never marry her. Why not? I've said all I'm going to say, she said. I'm gratified to meet an indexer who respects the privacy of others. Never index your own book, she stated. A Dupras, Bokanon tells us, is a valuable instrument for gaining and developing, in the privacy of an interminable love affair, in sets that are queer but true. The Mittens' cunning exploration of indexes was surely a case in point. A Dupras, Bokanon tells us, is also a sweetly conceited establishment. The Mittens' establishment was no exception. Sometime later, Ambassador Mitten and I met in the aisle of the airplane, away from his wife, and he showed that it was important to him that I respect what his wife could find out from indexes. You know why Castle will never marry the girl, even though he loves her, even though she loves him, even though they grew up together? He whispered. No, sir, I don't. Because he's a homosexual, whispered Mitten. She can tell that from an index, too. Chapter 56. A Self-Supporting Squirrel Cage. When Lionel Boyd Johnson and Corporal Earl McCabe were washed up onto the shore of San Lorenzo, I read, they were greeted by persons far worse off than they. The people of San Lorenzo had nothing but diseases, which they were at a loss to treat or even name. By contrast, Johnson and McCabe had the glittering treasures of literacy, ambition, curiosity, gall, irreverence, health, humor, and considerable information about the outside world. From the Calypsos again. Oh, a very sorry people, yes, did I find there. Oh, they had no music, and they had no beer. And oh, everywhere where they tried to perch belonged to Castle Sugar, Incorporated, or the Catholic Church. This statement of the property situation in San Lorenzo in 1922 is entirely accurate, according to Philip Castle. Castle Sugar was founded, as it happened, by Philip Castle's great-grandfather. In 1922, it owned every piece of arable land on the island. Castle Sugar's San Lorenzo operations, wrote young Castle, never showed a profit. But by paying laborers nothing for their labor, the company managed to break even year after year, making just enough money to pay the salaries of the workers' tormentors. The form of government was anarchy, save in limited situations where Castle Sugar wanted to own something or to get something done. In such situations, the form of government was feudalism. The nobility was composed of Castle Sugar's plantation bosses, who were heavily armed white men from the outside world. The knighthood was composed of big natives, for small gifts and silly privileges would kill or wound or torture on command. The spiritual needs of the people caught in this demoniacal squirrel cage were taken care of by a handful of butterball priests. The San Lorenzo Cathedral, dynamited in 1923, was generally regarded as one of the man-made wonders of the New World, wrote Castle. Chapter 57. The Queasy Dream. That Corporal McCabe and Johnson were able to take command of San Lorenzo was not a miracle in any sense. Many people had taken over San Lorenzo, had invariably found it lightly held. The reason was simple. God, in his infinite wisdom, had made the island worthless. Hernando Cortez was the first man to have his sterile conquest of San Lorenzo recorded on paper. Cortez and his men came ashore for fresh water in 1519, named the island, claimed it for Emperor Charles V, and never returned. Subsequent expeditions came for gold and diamonds and rubies and spices, found none, burned a few natives for entertainment and heresy, and sailed on. When France claimed San Lorenzo in 1682, wrote Castle, no Spaniards complained. When Denmark claimed San Lorenzo in 1699, no Frenchmen complained. When the Dutch claimed San Lorenzo in 1704, no Danes complained. When England claimed San Lorenzo in 1706, no Dutchman complained. When Spain reclaimed San Lorenzo in 1720, no Englishman complained. When, in 1786, African Negroes took command of a British slave ship, ran it ashore on San Lorenzo, and proclaimed San Lorenzo an independent nation, an empire with an emperor, In fact, no Spaniards complained. The emperor was Tambamwa, the only person who ever regarded the island as being worth defending. A maniac, Tambamwa, caused to be erected the San Lorenzo Cathedral and the fantastic fortifications on the north shore of the island, fortifications within which the private residence of the so-called President of the Republic now stands. The fortifications have never been attacked, not has any, nor has any sane man ever proposed any reason why they should be attacked. They have never defended anything. 1,400 persons are said to have died while building them. Of these 1,400, about half are said to have been executed in public for substandard zeal. Castle sugar came into San Lorenzo in 1916, during the sugar boom of the First World War. There was no government at all. The company imagined that even the clay and gravel fields of San Lorenzo could be tilled profitably, with the price of sugar so high. No one complained. When McCabe and Johnson arrived in 1922 and announced that they were placing themselves in charge, Castle Sugar withdrew flaccidly, as though from a queasy dream. Chapter 58. Charity with a Difference. There was at least one quality of the new conquerors of San Lorenzo that was really new, wrote young Castle. McCabe and Johnson dreamed of making San Lorenzo a utopia. To this end, McCabe overhauled the economy and the laws. Johnson designed a new religion. Castle quoted the Calypsos again. I wanted all things to seem to make some sense, so we all could be happy, yes, instead of tense. And I made up lies so that they fit all nice, and I made the sad world a paradise. There was a tug at my coat sleeve as I read. I looked up. Little Newt Honaker was standing in the aisle next to me. I thought maybe you'd like to go back to the bar, he said, and hoist a few. So we did hoist and topple a few, and Newt's tongue was loosened enough to tell me some things about Zinka, his Russian midget dancer friend. Their love nest, he told me, had been in his father's cottage on Cape Cod. I may not ever have a marriage, but at least I've had a honeymoon. He told me of idyllic hours he and his Zinka had spent in each other's arms, cradled in Felix Honeker's old white wicker chair, the chair that faced the sea. As Zinka would dance for him. Imagine, a woman dancing just for me. I can see you have no regrets. She broke my heart. I didn't like that much. But that was the price. In this world, you get what you pay for. He proposed a gallant toast. Sweethearts and wives, he cried. Chapter 59. Fasten your seatbelts. I was in the bar with Newt and H. Lowe Crosby and a couple of strangers when San Lorenzo was sighted. Crosby was talking about piss ants. You know what I mean by a piss ant? I know the term, I said, but it obviously doesn't have the ding-a-ling associations for me that it has for you. Crosby was in his cups and had the drunkard's illusion that he could speak frankly, provided he spoke affectionately. He spoke frankly and affectionately of Newt's size, something nobody else in the bar had so far commented on. I don't mean a little fellow like this. Crosby hung a ham hand on Newt's shoulder. It isn't size that makes a man a pissant. It's the way he thinks. I've seen men 4 times as big as this little feller here, and they were pissants. And I've seen little fellers, well, not this little actually, but pretty damn little, by God. And I call them real men. Thanks, said Newt pleasantly, not even glancing at the monstrous hand on his shoulder. Never had I seen a human being better adjusted to such a humiliating physical handicap. I shuddered with admiration. You were talking about piss ants, I said to Crosby, hoping to get the weight of his hand off Newt. Damn right I was. Crosby straightened up. You haven't told us what a pissant is yet, I said. A pissant is somebody who thinks he's so damn smart he can never keep his mouth shut. No matter what anybody says, he's got to argue with it. You say you like something, and by God, he'll tell you why you're wrong to like it. A pissant does his best to make you feel like a boob all the time. No matter what you say, he knows better. Not a very attractive characteristic, I suggested. My daughter wanted to marry a pissant once, said Crosby, darkly. Did she? I squashed him like a bug. Crosby hammered on the bar, remembering things the pissant had said and done. Jesus, he said. We've all been to college. His gaze lit on Newt again. You go to college? Cornell, said Newt. Cornell, said Crosby gladly. My God, I went to Cornell. So did he. Newt nodded at me. 3 Cornellians, all in the same plane, said Crosby, and we had another grand Falloon festival on our hands. When it subsided some, Crosby asked Newt what he did. I paint. Houses? Pictures. I'll be damned, said Crosby. Return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts, please, warned the airline hostess. We're over Monzano Airport, Boulevard, San Lorenzo. Christ! Now wait a goddamn minute here, said Crosby, looking down at Newt. All of a sudden I realized you got a name I've heard before. My father was the father of the atom bomb. Newt didn't say Felix Honecker was one of the fathers. He said Felix was the father. Is that so? Asked Crosby. That's so. And I was thinking about something else, said Crosby. He had to think hard. Something about a dancer. I think we better get back to our seats, said Newt, tightening some. Something about a Russian dancer. Crosby was sufficiently addled by booze to see no harm in thinking out loud. I remember an editorial about how maybe the dancer was a spy. Please, gentlemen, said the stewardess, you really must get back to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Newt looked up at H. Lou Crosby innocently. You sure the name was Honecker? And, in order to eliminate any chance of mistaken identity, he spelled out the name for Crosby. I could be wrong, said H. Lou Crosby. Chapter 60. An Underprivileged Nation. The island, seen from the air, was an amazingly rectangular was an amazingly regular rectangle. Cruel and useless stone needles were thrust up from the sea. They sketched a circle around it. At the south end of the island was the port city of Bolivar. It was the only city. It was the capital. It was built on a marshy table. The runways of Monzano Airport were on its waterfront. Mountains rose abruptly to the north of Bolivar, crowding the remainder of the island with their brutal humps. They were called the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, but they looked like pigs at a trough to me. Bolivar had many names. Cosma, Santa Maria, St. Louis, St. George, and Port Glory among them. It was given its present name by Johnson and McCabe in 1922. Was named in honor of Simon Bolivar, the great Latin American idealist and hero. When Johnson and McCabe came upon the city, it was built of twigs, tin, crates, and mud, rested on the catacombs of 1,000,000,000,000 happy scavengers, catacombs in a sour mash of slop, feculence, and slime. That was pretty much the way I found it too, except for the new architectural false space along the waterfront. Johnson and McCabe had failed to raise the people from misery and muck. Papa Manzano had failed too. Everybody was bound to fail, for San Lorenzo was as unproductive as an equal area in the Sahara or the polar ice cap. At the same time, it had a dense population, as could be found anywhere, China and India not excluded. There were 450 inhabitants for each uninhabitable square mile. During the idealistic phase of McCabe's and Johnson's recognition of San Lorenzo, it was announced that the country's total income would be divided among all adult persons in equal shares, wrote Philip Castle. The first and only time this was tried, each share came to between $6 and $7.